Hello and welcome to a new video. It has been a while. I've been kind of keeping things under wraps, just cooking away. Didn't really have anything interesting to share during EX7, and I was mostly prepping for Euro. So, first of all, I want to give a few shoutouts to a lot of people that helped me. Shoutouts to my roommates. Shoutouts to my girlfriend for supporting me and helping me test a lot. Shoutouts to my locals. Shoutouts to like everybody. I could name everybody like Trix, Liam, Andrew, Saf, Johnny, Derek. You guys. I'm not gonna name every single one of you. Terry, my father. Shoutouts to who else? Liam Canning, one of the people that from locals that I was like, what deck should I play? And then I listed like all the features of those decks, and he was like, I think you should play that deck because it just sounds really broken, and we'll get to that deck in a moment. And then people that are not like from my in-person circle, shouts to Alex or Huang from the Huang Zero channel, brand, Patreon, Discord. He was my coach. It had been my coach since Glasgow. So back in EX7, when I was preparing for Glasgow, I started getting coaching from Alex, and basically we bounced between a few decks on what decks I should take. I gave him sort of I want a deck that kind of does this, but we kind of worked out the decks that were sort of viable, and we practiced. We had sort of not a routine, but we had sort of a format for our coaching sessions, right? And then also shoutouts to Yuxo, aka Gilles. He also was playing this deck towards sort of I think it was 2 weeks before the event. I kind of pilled him on the deck. I was like, I'm playing this. I think you should play this. You're a better purple player than me. I literally had never played purple competitively up until Glasgow. And I just knew that I believed in the deck, and I won't mention what deck it is because engagement, so you people actually watch the video. But yeah, I think that is about it for shoutouts. If I missed anyone, I'll always shout out the same people. Shoutouts to Usman. He probably helped me out at some point. But yeah, all my testing people, group friends, and Alex and Yuxo. Now, what was special about Utrecht? So, Bandai Card Fest Utrecht. It was 2.0 format, which means that there was no LM. No LM means no level 6 aces, or 7 aces. So things like Shiva, Sakuya, what was the other ones? It probably wasn't that good, honestly. The Gabubon ace, the Agubon ace, there will be no scrambles and no dual color memory boosts. So you're effectively playing 2.0 special release. In 2.0 special release, you have half of BT19, sort of the miscellaneous half, so none of the tamer support, mostly sort of the off support. So that means that we got bees a little bit early, we got the fish support a little bit early, and that's sort of relevant. We had the Leviamon cards, the Lorelei cards, and we had the Dynast cards. And we had some of the Dark Knight support, most of the Dark Knight support. And that sort of helped my deck choices a little bit. I tested a little bit of everything, but I was pretty set on about 3 decks, 3 main decks that I was going to take to the event. So, again, no scrambles, no new aces, no dual color memory boosts. So, things like Leviamon can't really be considered because they can't play the black-red memory boost. Aces means that Tyrant was not a consideration because you wouldn't have access to Shiva, and Shiva is really important. No scrambles means that any deck like Zeph, Sendril, those kinds of decks that rely on scrambles, or any deck in general that relies on scrambles, right? Decks I want to constantly trade stacks with you wouldn't really be viable without scrambles in the mix. So that was basically the things that we're missing, and it's why our format was different to something like NA or OCE. Now for NA or Nationals format, they will have an LM, so it will be a slightly different metagame because those cards do make a big difference. Now, meta expectations. So these were the decks that I considered to be sort of positioned in if you look at the top 32 spread, at the end of the day, these were the decks I would expect to see up there with a few more options which I'll go over. So to quickly go over sort of the format, Any blue deck needs to have a shell that includes either Mirage or Hexa or a mixture of both. These are the best blue cards in the game by a mile. Mirage, like if you've seen the stream, you saw the funny meme of the guy like, ban BT11 Mirage. And BT11 Mirage has had sort of like the game in a chokehold for about a year and a little bit. And I think before unification, we will probably get some kind of revision list addressing the card. It's not uncommon for Ban Knight to hit super rares. I would still, if you're still going to nationals or OCE finals or LATAM, I would still probably test with the card around. But I would imagine that before unification, something will be done about Mirage. Now, Hexablau is only relevant in the sense that it gives blue a way to interact with tamers that it previously didn't have. So tamer decks or hybrid decks will just not be able to suspend because you'll just have more sources than them, right? So you're denying them a lot of the when attacking triggers. And sort of Hexamon or any deck that gets to run Hexamon will be a gatekeeper to things like Red Hybrid. Like, Red Hybrid does not have a great way to out-Hexa unless they Digicross for 6, assuming that they have both pieces very early on. So even decks like Imperial will probably splash the Hexa. And then further down from that, not in any particular order, but Three-Gear Angel, that deck was sort of like a dark horse. It has converted very little, but it was also brought very little at every tournament. So if you look at the 2 European tournaments that happened leading up to the event, you see that like not a lot of people brought Angels, but the people that did bring Angels went really far. The deck was incredibly well positioned. It has 2 major weaknesses, which are the Digivolve and EP-, which going into a purple and blue meta, on paper it doesn't have to contest those things. However, the mirror can be a little bit tricky, which, hopefully you don't play the mirror as Angels. And any like rogue black deck or any rogue yellow deck or any deck that gets to use both EP- and the Digivolve would be able to sort of like beat up Angels. Now, for hybrids, I included them all under one section, but that basically means red hybrid, purple mill hybrid, blue hybrid, which I did not expect to be popular. I don't think blue hybrid was particularly good. Too linear, not fast enough, and sort of like very sacky. Whereas like red hybrid, purple hybrid are much more robust strategies. And then, green hybrid is not really a thing. Yellow hybrid, it just falls under like the Rehe toolbox. Black hybrid doesn't really exist. So when I'm talking about hybrids, I'm mostly talking about like Rehe, purple mill, and like red hybrid, right? Takamika. So Takamika, I think it was sort of the big boogeyman that like if your deck didn't have a way to interact with Takamika, you probably like needed to like reevaluate like your core strategy, because very similar to red hybrid is a lot more easy to interact with. Takamika, if you don't have a way to interact, you might just lose, like you just get knocked out because they just open combo and there's nothing you could do. Armor as a deck definitely did really well in the first week when people were experimenting with the Huang Kuns and first format of the event. Unsolved metagame, unaffected body that can be blocked is probably going to be really good. But then when you looked at the second event, the OP Ultimate Cup, the deck didn't do as great. But I still expect people to be on armor because the deck is very mid-rangey and the people that have been playing it don't really have reason to switch off. It has good matchup spread across the board. Does struggle against a couple things like Angels is really rough, but you're still well positioned against the rest of the metagame. Imperial. I expected Imperial to fall off drastically. The deck just isn't really that good. Like, it's very good against anything that can contest it, but the deck is still kind of linear and relies on you opening sort of like a 2-card combo. When I say 2-card, it's a little bit more than 2 cards, but the deck needs you to have like a very good opening hand to then be able to play the game. Anything that is a little bit of an awkward game or an awkward hand will significantly slow you down. And so the other thing that Imperial has is the Daiken, right? Like, having 2 Daikens in rotation means that they'll effectively be able to play for an extra long period of time, and means that they can like play out of thin air. So again, you would need some kind of like tamer interaction to deal with the Imperial. Then we have Levia, which no spoilers, but that was the deck that I took. Now the thing with Levia or Levia or however you want to pronounce it is that on paper it has the best matchup spread. It has most of the tools to interact with the format. It's incredibly consistent, and it has a adaptable game plan. It can either play to board or it can just force the opponent to respect you. And then finally, Galaxy. Basically, that means like either the Mirage bottom end or just like Galaxy pieces with like a toolbox approach. That deck is pretty good. Its consistency is, I would say, slightly above average. Like they have all the level 4 search. They tick all the right boxes, but the deck is sort of like a linear stack deck. So anytime that like you don't have the right 6 for the format, the right 6 for the matchup, you're kind of like a little bit shaky. It does have an independent game plan. Like if you like 3-check Apollo someone, force them to deal with that, that's pretty good. However, the main issue that deck has is like, again, not seeing the right piece. It doesn't have a ton of ways to interact with Floodgates in its engine. I mean, there's the Flare Mono, the Fear Mono, whatever you want to call it, the level 5. I think it's Flare. It can play some non-engine, and there's like variety in its builds. The deck can be incredibly unfair, and the deck is pretty good, but it, I think, struggles a little bit to convert. I think it's more popular in NA, but the deck is still like incredibly powerful. And then the oddballs, right? Sort of like the rogue picks. Any mother control Shoto decks, I think we wouldn't see a majority of them convert, but I would expect at least like one of them to convert, which did end up happening. I'll go over the top 32. I have insider trader info. Phoenixmon. This was sort of like one of my other picks. The Phoenixmon does extremely well into any purple deck. It does pretty well into any purple deck, any armor deck. It does really well into most hybrid decks. It only really struggles with like Hexablau a little bit, and Imperial is by far its worst matchup. So realistically, Phoenixmon was like really well positioned just because Imperial wasn't that good, and you're more likely to hit like your good matchup. So I'm not upset that I didn't take Phoenixmon, because I ended up playing against Red Hybrid early on. So there's a chance that I would have had a similar run. And considering that I played against, when I go over my my matchups, considering that I played against a blue deck to start off with, maybe it was a good thing that I took the deck that I took. Green. So green was in a really odd spot. I really wanted to force green. If you know the K-Beads brand, well, actually, you might not know, because considering that I uploaded an armor deck profile and the Phoenixmon deck profile, I'm primarily a green player. And so it just didn't feel like there was a premier good green deck to take. Now, some people might say Terriermon, and like Terriermon is kind of cute, it gives you the illusion that you're playing the game, like you're raising out Terriermons and you're clearing things, but then like you're never really like winning the game most of the time, right? Like obviously a Terriermon specialist will be able to get wins, and there was people that were very close of topping with Terriermon. The deck has most of the tools that you'd want for the format. It has DP minus, Digivolve, Tamer Lock. It has armors, it has the speed. The deck is actually pretty well positioned. So there is a world where I should have maybe tested Terriermon and I would have maybe been okay. Tyrant wasn't really a choice. Doesn't have a good Imperial matchup, doesn't have a good Leviamon matchup, doesn't have a good Hexablau matchup. Red Hybrid is pretty doable. Takemika is okay. I would say like Takemika is like definitely doable. But things like Imperial could kind of kill your run, right? And there is again a world where like where Tyrant would have been okay. Maybe something like Angels could be maybe problematic, but if you navigate the matchup correctly, it's very, very doable. So Tyrant, it was armor can be really, really tough because they have an affected blocker. They're really huge, and Heaven's Judgment just like absolutely smokes your pack, unless they're not playing, which is a different story. But Tyrant, it's up there. But again, all of these decks were close, but they always fell short by a little bit, right? It relied on you dodging a matchup. Whereas something like Levia, it doesn't, it just kind of plays through everything. And then the final green deck that I really wanted to take was Leopardmon. So just to quickly go over Leopardmon, it has the best flooded in the game, so it has Pomamon, it has Terriermon, which is a men blocker. It has DP minus with Cherubi. It has the Digivolve with the Rapidmon. It has Bounce with the Leopardmon. It goes wide. It has the Toolboxy approach. It has Lingering DP minus. It has the ability to play Quartzmon for the Tamer decks. The main issue with the deck is its initial sort of like consistency. Like your opener unless you're playing the plant build, your openers are going to be a little bit tricky, and your consistency can be up or down. It can fluctuate. And when you're playing a long tournament, you can't really gamble on, like your hands. You need to make sure that your hands are like very playable. Realistically, the deck would have probably been okay for the event, but I would have required me to test a little bit more, and I was just more comfortable on Levia. And then finally, Lucamon. Lucamon, I think a lot of people were excited to play the deck. It's a kind of a cool control strategy, but its game plan kind of falls flat to some of the other decks in the metagame, and you're not really doing much. Like, your ceiling is pretty low, and you're relying on sacking a little bit, and you have to rely on like other non-engine that other decks just can play better than you, like Biting Crush. And then 7 Great Demon Lords. I was expecting this deck to convert by like one person, right? Like, if one person was like really good at Demon Lords and they dodged a couple matchups, they could definitely make it. And you know, that became true. So when I was looking at the decks that I wanted to bring, it needed to have sort of like these things like in the checklist, right? So it needed to play mem blockers, because mem blockers are important against like Mirage, Galaxy, any deck that sets up like lots of boosts. Like, mem blockers are really good, like any sort of like Lord Nightmon. Oh, speaking of Lord Knight, that deck is fake. Like, anybody playing Lord Nightmon, that deck is not good. That deck is like the illusion of a good deck because of like Japan list. But think about it, right? Japan only found out about the Dark Animal engine sort of like now, and they're incorporating it into Lord Nightmon. That deck is not good. That deck is just worse Leviamon. It just has a good armor matchup. I've been saying this for a really long time. That deck is just not very good. Anyway, so you needed mem blockers, you needed Tamer Interaction, you needed a way to beat the BT19 Horkunmon, which gives you sort of unredirectable, or a way to like interact with being unblockable in some capacity. You needed some kind of Digivolve, you needed a way to interact with Takamika, and you needed to have sort of like an answer or a way to sort of deal with Paladin, right? So because I took Leviamon, and I'll go over the deck in a little bit, if we go through the checklist, well, I have Gazi, I have the ability to delete Tamers, I have ways to not care about blockers or unblockable, because if they're unblockable, well, I can just wait a turn and then kill them on the crackback by using effects, so something like Mirage, right? And I have the Lord Knight to force collision, so unless it's on the turn that evolve into the Hwakunmon, which means that they can be deleted by battle, on a follow-up turn, even if it's an unsuspended Magnamon, I can force collision because they have keyword blocker. The Digivolve, Lord Knight provides the Digivolve, so that gives me an out to something like Angels, and I have a way to interact with Takamika because I have Biting Crush. Paladin doesn't hurt as much as you think it does. Like, typically if they're using Paladin on you, they're just putting all of your good cards back into the deck, which means they get to like reuse their effects, and you cycle through so much. Like, in the mid game, by the time that they do want a Paladin, like an early Paladin is not going to hurt you. A mid game Paladin, you already have most of your engine going, and you don't have that wide of a board. Like, you get like reverse OTK. If anything, it just means that like they get like 2 swings, and then that's 5 memory for you to steal with like regular Leviathan or Levy X. So basically, by addressing all these things, Leviathan just had every tool that you would want in a 2.0 format, right? The issue with the deck is that the deck can be difficult to pilot over a long tournament. A short tournament, the deck is so good because you don't get exhausted that quickly. Over a long tournament, because you have to sort of like think about where you're trashing, where you're setting up your lines of plays, you can fatigue yourself. And that was like the main thing for me, was that like I have in the past played combo heavy decks like Bloom to a successful degree, but sometimes, you know, out of my own sort of like stamina, right? Sometimes I just fatigue and I make a misplay or whatever, which has happened in the past, and did happen in this tournament. I think I crashed out like once, and you know, I just made a wrong decision. But other than that, you know, these are the things that I would want in my deck, and so Levy was just the most correctest choice. So I'll now go over the actual deck list. And let's get into the list. So this is the mat that you get for participating in the tournament. You know, it's a little cool flex you can bring back to locals for the people that didn't go. It's like, whoa, we got this mat that everybody got. That's really cool. Anyway, I digress. So here's the token that I use, just an Octo token, because you do, you know, need tokens in some capacity. Although there are the Bandai ones, I just chose to use this one because it's a little bit cooler. And for the eggs, I went with 4 Pseudomon, just because it is the most bang for your buck. No point running Demimera. The only downside of this is that it can be the reason why you can beat Mirage or lose to Mirage. So a lot of the times against matchups where the stupid dog that makes me look bad is around, you kind of have to manage your Tsunomon draw a little bit. But most of the time, 99% of the time, this is just the better egg to help you cycle a little bit more. And then for my egg sleeves, these are the ones from our locals. Well, we all kind of drew them, Shoutouts to my locals if you recognize your little Scrimble Bimbo. The Tentomon's mine. I've either already done individual shoutouts or I will do individual shoutouts at some point. Now let's actually get into the meat and potatoes of the list. So to Biting Crush, this is the most important card in your deck for exactly Takemika, and then every other matchup this is a great security bomb, and sometimes when you're not really doing anything, it just tells someone to go away for a memory. Often a lot less because, typically if you're like a 3, you're only really passing 5, and Biting Crush is really, really good in the format. It's also very good against blue. You'd be surprised. Like against decks like Imperial, this card's really good. Against Lifefang Nightclaw, anything that uses the Huantun, this card's really good. And obviously against Takemika. The card was pretty good all day. 2 copies is all you really need. I've toyed around with 3 to see it a little bit more, but the downside was that I was at the time only playing 2 7th, but I reverted the ratios back to the 2-2. And 7th is basically your easiest way to deal with level 6s because it is a little bit of a gap in terms of levels in your deck. Like the opponent, if they're good, they can kind of mask, but having a card that says delete a specific 6, not highest level, lowest level, it's just very nice. And it's also your best discard outlet for free, not only in security, but also when you're doing your combos. And also can definitely help against Mirage in security, because remember, even though if they're swinging at level 7, you can still discard to make it a little bit harder for them to get an extra swing. But that's basically it about on the security bombs. Security bombs. Most of the time you're going to draw them anyway because your deck filters through so much, so it's quite easy to tell if they're in security or not, which is one of the advantages of this deck, is that you have access to your whole deck most of the time, so you can kind of usually tell it's in security, which is good and bad. Sometimes it's like, oh, I know that I cannot get to this card because it's in security. Anyway, starting off with the rookies, 4 Goblimon. I almost said 3 as if I'm playing Yu-Gi-Oh! But 4 Goblimon, this is your premier rookie, just for that memory gain, and typically where you're going to put in the back a lot of the times, and then also your most passive brought back off of something like a Cerberus or a Drago, just because that memory will lead to extension. So, very insane card, and one of the culprits of the Dark Animal engine, even though he's not a Dark Animal. And then I chose to play, the card fell, 3 Gazi. So, like I said before, you need to play man blockers this format, and Gazimon is obviously the one in purple. Only chose to run 3 because I still wanted to keep the Psychmon, which you'll see a little bit, but I couldn't really tell if that was a mistake or the correct play. I never really got digicrossed against, even against like the red hybrid players that I played against. That didn't really happen. So maybe I could have gone into the 4th Gazi and I wouldn't have really felt the difference. But against things like Demon Lords or any Megazoo style deck or Royal Knights, it can definitely come up for the Psychmon. But again, I'll talk about this when we get to the Psych. And then only 1 Gabu, because that's all we can play. This guy's actually pretty clutch throughout the event. Finds your protoforms. Finds your protoforms, finds your X antibody pieces, which are the most important pieces, like your Cerberus, your Dober. The protection never comes up, but he's pretty clutch. Also, discarding helps you set up your trash. 1 Labra to kind of get all the pieces that you're missing. So if you have like Labra plus protoform, you're typically getting back the 2 levels that you need very constantly, which is very good. It means that it can grind for a really long time, as long as you're managing your 7th Lightning properly and resolving all of your draw effects. Even if you have an empty deck and then 7th Lightning, put it back. As long as you don't draw any more cards, you can never really deck out, which is great. But Labra, contributes to you having like a near infinite access to your bottom end, including Anubis, so you also have an infinite access to a 6. 1 Lotmon, this card was pretty good all day. Again, discarding cards in hand is great, and the extra 3k just means that you can safely swing over any 16k's in security, which when you're playing against sort of like a blind deck, it's always safe to assume that they're going to have, a big guy in security, because, 13 and 14 are great numbers, but 17 is a little bit better. So obviously the 1 Lotmon. The one cost Evo. didn't really come up. And then the one Slackmon, the Flood Goat, he was there. He was a guy. Can't say that for me it came up personally, but against other people, I have been told that the card has tested well. So Psychmon's alright. So that was it for the rookies. I believe it's 11. Now, this is the controversial thing. I'm playing 4 Double X. This is not controversial. This is very standard. And then only 4 more level 4. So 8 level 4 in total. Shout outs again to Yuxo, one of the main people that I was theory crafting the list with, and he had a lot more success than me. But the theory was that, like, really only really want to see the Dober X, and everything else is kind of a flex slot. So as long as you see 1 level 4 to start off with, you don't really need to pad out your numbers so much, because you will eventually get to all of them, and because you have, like, Labyrinth to add back, you don't need to constantly go into the deck to always get back your pieces. Like I said, between Labyrinth and Protoform, you can usually find the 2 missing cards that you need, whether it's like a rookie and a 3 or a 4 and a 5. I said rookie and a 3 as if they're not the same thing. But yeah, now to actually go over the individual cards and less about the rest. So obviously, you play your 4 Dober X. It's the best card, the best level 4 in your deck by a mile. Triggering your Goblins insane, and also the ESS off of the Cerberus comes up the insane amount of times, or the Drago. The retail also is important, because sometimes you can just like retail into a big stack if you don't have a clean out, which is nice. And then 1 Delta. This was more of like a personal pick. I know some people have been opting to play more or less. I chose to just play the 1. It came in clutch all day. Like, every time my opponent would play a single Floodgate, this guy would just be insane. Very good against armor too. You can constantly like 2 for 1 them, on play, or when Digivolving pop the guy, and then like you can pop it off of something like Cerberus X, and then pop another guy. Like, you can get multiple procs of the Delta. So overall, the card is really good. Also, having the blocker ESS means that you don't constantly have to find or replay out the Dobers. You can just loop the Dober X and constantly give retail to the stack that has the Delta. So that came up a good amount. And then 1 Octo, 2 Dober. So obviously, if you're playing the Dober X, you might as well play the Dober. Also, your blocker for your matchups, which I'm pretty sure I've already covered. And the 1 Octo as sort of like your engine requirement for playing Leviathan. It's one of your few ways to trigger your effects to give the opponent something. So Octo is just pretty clutch at 1. You could play 2 if you wanted to focus more on the OTK lines with Cerberus, but I figured just keeping my list balanced would be the best approach. So, speaking of Cerberus, 4 Cerberus X and 1 regular Cerberus. Dark Animal package. This guy is insane. Like, this guy is so good. But I never felt like I needed more than 1. Typically, like, the ways you want to go into this card are very specific. Like, he's a 5 that doesn't add cards to hand. Well, optionally, the Rush ESS comes up, like, every time. And he's just an overall great card. And it's mostly because you can't really play any more copies of him, because you have to play the Drago as, like, your, fish engine, I suppose. Like, you have the Dark Animal cards and then the fish cards, I suppose. Because you have to play Drago, you can't really play any more copies of this without, making your deck a little bit too top heavy. But these cards were all great. Like, the Cerberus is how you typically find your OTK lines, because, unsuspend generic on a purple deck that goes into level 6s for free is really normal, guys, I swear. And then also the Rush, and then obviously Drago. Drago is typically like your mid-game, end-game card that you're going to be looping a lot off of the Protoform, like as your add-back, because it forces the opponent to play something, which plays into the Leviathan X, which is really good. And then the Piercing can definitely come up. Like, anything that if they bring back a level 4 that you can't really get rid of, you can just pierce into it, and that's pretty good. So yeah, these are the level 5s. Ratio-wise, never really needed them. I think there was 1 game where the level 5s went missing because I had 2 Cerberuses in security. But other than that, it worked. Now, we're approaching the 10-minute mark here, so I'll, speed things up just a little bit. 3 Leviathan and 3 Leviathan X. These are your go-to boss monsters. Incredible cards. Like, what these cards do, right? But, I mean, it's just really funny that, your level 6 that deletes 2 things often will actually only cost 3 memory, so anytime you have like a delay card to go into it, you go into it for incredibly cheap. And this guy is just like the most ignorant card ever. Why does it evolve from the trash if you check an opponent's tamer? The amount of times that happens, it's a lot more than you think. But yeah, Leviax is really like the card that brings the whole archetype together. It's your tamer interaction. It's the way that you're going to just go through the opponent's entire security. It keeps the opponent playing fair when you're playing unfair, which is, why this deck has such an edge over the metagame. And then I guess I'll go over the utility top end. So we have one Lord Knight, one Anubis, and one Rune Mode. I wouldn't really call Anubis utility. I would call this stupid dog that makes me look good, actually. That doesn't make me look bad. It's that this dog makes me look really good. Anytime you draw Anubis, the game just it warps around that card. The card is insane. You could pass the opponent like 8 memory or 9 memory and just Anubis play out Levia, and like that'll win you the game sometimes because you cleared like everything and you've developed like an insane amount of damage. That's just like in a vacuum what you can do. There's so many little tricks that you can do with Anubis. Like you can go Anubis to play out Drago, Anubis to play out Octo, get multiple level 5 pops. The card is it's proactive, it's passive, it does everything. I'm going to stop glazing Anubis because there's really no point. The card should have never been to one. The card should have been banned. But let's talk about Lore Knight. Rune Mode is Rune Mode. I only really Rune Moded Attack Mika player once. Most of the time the card wasn't. It was good, but is this the Altar or the regular one? This is, I think, the regular one. The card was good. It was like, it's pretty good. It only really came up once, and I was already winning that game. Is it cuttable? Not really. It comes up against like your middle of the pack matchups like Imperial, things that you already win against, just to it just really solidifies wins. That's like the main thing about this card. But let's talk about Lord Knight. I'm gonna spend knock my setup a little. I'm gonna spend a little bit of time talking about Lord Knight. So basically, the philosophy when building the deck was: is the card worth playing, and if so, how many copies? Because you already have such a densely packed engine. Because you have to play the Octo, the Dragos, the Biting Crushes. You have to play out the 7th Lightnings, right? These are cards that regular Lord Knightmon does not have to play. But this card gives you something that the deck otherwise has no means of interacting with, which is Magna X. Now, the problem with Magna X is that if they have the fish, they're unblockable. So your typical strategy of blocker retail doesn't work because they're unblockable. So you need to find a card that lets you deal with them on your own terms. And even then, there's still holes in the strategy. That being Paladin. Now, the card is really good, assuming that the opponent doesn't have a Paladin, and you should play as if they don't, because if they do ace you, then that's fine. That's much easier to do on a follow-up turn as long as you're masking your remaining bodies on the board by just leveling them up all by 1. But the main thing was like, okay, well, we need to have something with armor because that could be a run killer. I built the deck to basically win almost every matchup by having something for the matchup, and the things that I didn't include for I should just naturally beat, right? Things like Mirage, like I already have a good matchup into Mirage. I don't really need to add cards to beat it. But Armor is a matchup where it's like, if I go against like one Armor, okay, I'm now X1 if I don't have anything for. If I go against another Armor player, it's like, oh, I'm approaching, X2 territory. And that just couldn't happen if the goal was to at least make day 2. But yeah, the card's really good. Collision Piercing. The Digivolve doesn't really come up because unless you're playing against... Oh, the other matchup of the card is really good against is Digimon. That is the other matchup of this card. Puts a lot of work. You don't really have any ways to get it back unless like you go Lord Knight and then you put Rune Mode on top. That's and then the Protoform under. That's like the only way you get to use your Lord Knight. But you can't really run multiple copies of this card because it is majority of the time dead against other matchups. So it was basically, if I see the Lord Knight, I need to make the most use out of it, and I did. It won me my armor it won me my armor matchup by a landslide, and most of the time I was using it as a free discard. Now, consistency. For trainings, wisdoms with the Goblimon on. This is just my preferred artwork. I just like the Goblimon a little bit too much. And then 3 boosts. So one of the differences between this version of the deck that I was playing and the one that I took to Glasgow, don't want to think about that event again, it was the best of 1. Besides the point. The difference was that I was playing 4 boosts because it was a best of 1 event, so I wanted to have the deeper search as well as a way to beat Imperial without, typically this deck doesn't really lose to Imperial inherently because if you can turn it into a 6 and stop the Dragon Mud from floodgating you. But I just wanted the memory to be able to play against things like Mirage and whatever. In this metagame of BT 2.0, you just kind of want the training. Being able to develop double training turn 1 is like quite insane. The boost was still great. Because of the memory floodgate issue, trainings are also just like a little bit better. So that was sort of like the main reason. I'm elaborating on something that doesn't really need elaborating, but I'm just explaining like why, right? And then finally, probably the best card in the deck is 4 Protoform. I'm sorry for the people that don't have 4 Protoform. I've tested with the 1 regular Exenti body, and the card just puts in too much work. Like, the fact that it's a heal and recursion piece means that you get to play games way longer than you should. You get to survive against decks way longer, and this deck, I've said this time and time again, this deck has the best comeback in the game. So being able to make sure you see your Protoform is just too important. Like, you don't really have a way to search this other than the Gabu, and you need to see the first one ASAP. Any other copy after that, like, you can start doing some like crazier combos, but for the most part you just need to see that first one. So let's go over some of my matchups. So round 1 was against somebody from Team Olympus, a Spanish organization team, locals, and I was playing against Galaxy Toolbox. That matchup I have played a good amount, and it typically goes along the lines of they can never really OTK you, so you're never really under any pressure, and if you trade stacks, it's kind of similar to Mirage, like you will eventually win, right? And also the fact that you gatekeep the level 5 Hokunmon, the one from the EX6 set that lets them play out of 3, you basically like cut off their lines of play by half. And so they typically like are going to try stun you with Cressamon, but most of them doesn't really achieve anything. You just kind of like build up, and you have blockers as well as like a really wide board, and you also have Gazi, which cuts them off like a good amount, and Rune Mode. So I felt pretty good after round 1 because typically I have really bad round 1s. I'm usually not like quite focused, and if I get to win my round 1, typically it means that I'll usually have a good rest of the day. There's also a lot less pressure because I'm not immediately in the X1 rogue bracket. Round 2 was against Red Hybrid. This one, I would say that it was less on the player and more on my mistakes. Like, Red Hybrid is an incredibly easy deck to pilot, and so like you're kind of on the back foot the entire time. So not only are you playing under pressure from having a bad matchup, but also you're playing under pressure from the fact that you can't really make mistakes, and I made a couple mistakes. Game 1, one of the mistakes that I made was the fact that I had lethal on board, but I couldn't. There was a Crimson Blaze insecurity. Now, I don't remember correctly if it was Crimson Blaze first check or second check. If it was Crimson Blaze second check, I would have had lethal by just swinging my rookies first. But I, for some reason, chose to swing with my main stacks first to get multiple checks in, and it meant that I was short on damage. And on the follow-up turn, they just had like enough gas to kill me. Game number 2, I incorrectly discarded a Lore Knight instead of discarding Levi X, thinking that I had Levi X in trash. What I did have was 7th Lightning, which I set up deliberately. This was specifically because if they go into the Gigas line and they don't clear your 5, you can evolve into the Levi X and then kill the Tamer, and then shuffle the 7th to kill the Gigas that they play out. That one was genuinely my bad. It was still round 2, and I was playing against probably like my worst matchup, and so I just should have taken a little bit longer. Like, Red Hybrid matches are going to be a bit quicker anyway, so you do have time to think for a little bit, and I was just playing a little bit faster. It was like half an ego thing, half another, like half. I was already in the back foot, and it was whatever. So at this point, I'm X1, and I'm now in rogue bracket, right? I could be playing literally against everything else. So the goal here is to basically like try not to lose for as long as I can, to keep playing into the people that were also X1, but you'll gradually get sort of better and better, right? Because like, if you're X1 on a meta deck, it means that I'll eventually, me also being on a meta deck, I'll get to target the decks that I want to beat. So from then on, I played against Armor. That one was against, I believe, Agito, one commentator slash content creator. he was playing armor, but I just had the upper hand. Like, he really did not know how to play the matchup, and I saw the Lord Knight, and my game plan just worked. He had Death X, Heaven's Judgment. It really didn't matter. I was winning like the entire time, so it felt pretty good, like being able to beat the armor player, and then from there I was basically like, okay, the armor plays will probably get filtered out just because I don't see armor converting that well unless it was like a specific group of people, and I should be able to just dodge it for the rest of the day. So then round 4 I go against Takemika. That matchup is pretty easy. I'm not going to say too much, but there are ways to lose a little bit less to Levia, but typically you can tell by how confident the opponent is when you activate Biting Crush, right? Like empty board or Uko or whatever, if you just go Biting Crush past the like 5, you can usually tell if they know how to beat it or not. And so, based on my opponent's demeanor, I knew that I basically solidified that game. And then game 2, same thing. So the first opponent, it was a little bit more straightforward. The second opponent on Takemika, he went for more like weird lines, like playing out double Fenrir Luga to try to clear my stuff back, but those never really achieved combo. So either way, most of the time that I went against the Takemika players, they never actually checked my security, and if they did check, it was a random Uko to give me back a protoform. So, good on them for giving me the cards back. But, both of my Takemika players, they were really nice opponents. It was a good time. Round 6 was against Purple Hybrid Mill. This opponent did not really know how to play against Levia, and so I just was able to loop my protoforms and basically have like infinite health and infinite sort of like resources to just constantly contest what they're playing and killing out the mem setters and choking as much as possible. That would demand them to use options. I think I played like that matchup pretty well because this was one of the matchups I was the most scared of, was the purple hybrid matchup. And my round 7 opponent, Joker from the Raid and Trade tournament organizing group, we were talking about how like he was also thinking about taking Levia, and that matchup was I think I played it to the best of my ability. He also had like very strong hands, especially game 2. Like he saw all the Jack raids. But the main thing was that game 1 I didn't see level 5 in time, and game 2 I was playing with no protoform, so he was just basically able to do whatever he wanted. The color change in the milling doesn't really affect you as much as you think you do. You have lots of effects that like evolve on name, like you have Cerberus X that evolves on Cerberus, you have Levia X that evolves on Levia. So typically I prefer ending on Levia if they have any like remaining bodies left on board, just because you can then like kill the tamer that they spawn out, which is pretty good. And then from here on out, oh, I made a mistake. I did not win against Red Hybrid. It was 1-2. Let's go back to the slideshow. So yeah, from here on out, it was basically like sort of like the end of the day, and I can't really say that I was feeling fatigued. I played against like Red Hybrid, and that one was a close game. I was able to win game 2 just on a quick OTK that he wasn't really seeing anything, and then game 3, I think the main thing that happened was that I was playing too passive. He opened a little bit slow, and I wanted him to have his first turn of like raising to deal like the amount of damage that he wanted to deal, and then on the follow-up turn I would have enough gas to kind of like kill him again. The problem was that I should have realistically just played more aggressively, building a board like up front to kind of like set myself up for future turns even more, to get my deck going, right? And instead I was just playing like a little bit too passive. That one was also probably on me. I think at this point I had already lost the round before, so I was X2, so my chances of making it 2 are very slim, just because I lost a round early and that opponent did not do well at all. And then the Red Hybrid matchup, it was already unfavored, and I had already gone up against Red Hybrid, so my mental was not in the best place. But we bounced back in round 9, played against Galaxy Mirage. This was basically like only using the blue pieces from Galaxy. Yeah, like I made a mistake game 1, which I could have got into Anubis to clear his level 5, leaving him only with a 3. Instead, I didn't really play the best, and I kind of slowly bled out. Games 2, he played into a Biting Crush. Like he made a 6, then I biting crush, then we both set up. He raises, goes Hwakun, play out the 3, and then I biting crush, steal turn. Um, I mean, he said himself that he just like completely forgot that the biting crush was on the field. That can happen, end of the day. And yeah, game 3, it was I think he was struggling to find a level 6 for a little bit, and I just kind of like played a little bit more ignorantly. And then last round, I also put 2-0, and it wasn't a 2-0. I lost. I'm very good at making slides, guys. Trust. Yeah, they and then round 10, played against Red Hybrid. That was like a nothing game. Like he just kind of saw everything very on time. And the thing with Levi is that it's like really difficult to contest Red Hybrid when they have like a Goonie burning Greymon to give themselves like the extra 2k, and then the extra 2k again to like pop your Levi. Like you can only try to do so much. Like, should I have practiced the matchup more? Yeah, but the main takeaway here is that I played against 1, 2, 3 Red Hybrids and I lost all of them. Had I played against one different matchup, I probably would have gone top 64. But that's just how the tournament goes. So overall, I was really confident, like going, like not confident going into the tournament. I was actually not very confident at all. But the more I kept playing, the more confident I was in my ability to win like every single game. The games that I lost were most of the time out of my control, and the games that I actually got to play, I felt very much in control of the game. And let's go over the top 32. Shout out to Gemmo. He spoke with the guy that runs the Digital Gate Open website. Shout out to the website. It's really good. It's my preferred way of analyzing topical deck lists. And Jambo spoke with the guy like in person, and he got access to top 32. If we look at one of the messages that Tamer Jambo posted here, shout out to Tamer Jambo. So, looking at the top 32, we have 9 Mirages, and there's sort of like a couple variants in Mirage. Assume that it's either sort of like a more pure build or the Floodgate build, right? The build that relies on the Hwakun to spit out a Floodgate, and then you have like the Mirage, and you have like 2 Floodgates, right? We can just assume that most of the Mirage lists was sort of similar to that. We have 4 Angels, which in the top 32 makes a lot of sense. The deck converts well to a top 16, top 8 degree, but more likely to convert at a top 32 stage. The deck was incredibly well positioned. 4 Takemika, which, makes sense. Only 3 armors, so the deck still converted pretty well, but in a top 32, considering that this was one sort of like a front runner of the metagame, 3, is pretty good. Only 2 Levia, right? And why could this be? Well, if Levia is so well positioned, what were the things gatekeeping Levia? And it's probably the fact that, if you're in the X1 bracket, X2 bracket, you probably ran into run killers, things like Red Hybrid, or things that, are a little bit more rogue, they just don't have a good matchup into. Now, not that I'm some kind of like Levia stan, but that is probably why, like, the deck also requires you to have some sort of like knowledge of initially good hands into decks like in the Mirage deck, and the Angel deck can also be pretty tricky. To Imperial, I mean, pretty good. I'm not surprised. I think like to Imperial makes sense. The deck wasn't that well positioned, but it still did pretty well. 2 Purple Hybrid, and only 1 Red Hybrid. So 3 Hybrid decks out of top 32, which is like not a lot considering that like a lot of people brought like Purple Hybrid and Red Hybrid. The decks just didn't have what it took. The decks didn't have what it took to compete with the already established decks. Red Hybrid can kind of crash out and just sometimes doesn't really interact with decks that well. Things like Angels, like what are you going to do if you just get Ace, right? And Purple Hybrid, that deck is really awkward because in a vacuum, the mill game plan and the loop version of the deck, like, yeah, it's pretty good. But when you actually have to go against strategies like Mirage that like really check you, like how are you supposed to beat BT11 Mirage? Like you're adding cards, you're drawing cards, you can't really use mat. The deck will just floodgate you. And then 1 Red Hybrid, like I said, I think like the more I played the format, the less confident I was in Red Hybrid. The deck just didn't seem that good. It just had a couple good matchups. Like any deck that was like 2 passive, yes, it was very good. 1 Birds, shoutouts to Tommy Tricks on the sticks. He was the Birds player. He was playing Ancient Grim on Birds. I think it's a pretty good rogue pick. Not only that people knew how to play against it, it was well positioned into all the purple decks and had like a ton of speed. 1 Mother Control, I believe this was just your classic like Shadow Mother Black Hybrid adjacent deck. That deck is pretty good into like anything that is remotely awkward. Like it's really good at farming things like Red Hybrid. But anything that like Mirage, like it's too passive, like you can kind of get them to like no security, you can clear their fives and become unblockable, so it kind of struggles into like anything that's like actually good. It's a decent control deck, but not the premier control deck, I would say. One Imperial Armor, this was, I think, one of the better positioned like Imperial variants. It could play Magna, it could play Hexa, and it could play Pildramon, so having like those three tools made the deck like extremely good. One Demon Lord and one Leviamon. Purple control, pretty good. All right, so top four. Shoutouts once again to Digital Gate Open, awesome website. And when you look at the top four, you'd actually be surprised. It was one Imperial, one Demon Lords, Angels, and Mirage, right? And the winner was actually Mirage. Shouts to Elixir, he has an interview with the champion, but it was Mirage on like Floodgate Mirage. Now, analyzing the top four, you can kind of tell how it went, right? Imperial just naturally beats Demon Lords. So there wasn't really anything that Demon Lords player could do just because Imperial will just like run through their security and doesn't really care. Like security bombs, partition, Daiken doesn't like unless they have like Leviamon early on, which means that then they don't really get the flow. That like Imperial will just outspeed Demon Lords. So the finals was Imperial versus Mirage, and Mirage versus Angels is kind of weird. But that was basically like the top four, right? Any final notes when it comes to top four? It's very interesting. Like if you look at the top 32, when you look at the top 32, some of the decks just like kind of crashed out. Takamika didn't really do much. Armor didn't really do much. Imperial didn't really go anywhere. None of the hybrid decks went anywhere. And it could be that like we could paint a picture here like, oh, you go into top 32. Let's assume that all the Takamika players like win against like whatever, but then like Takamika versus Mirage, that matchup is a little bit suspicious. I'm not gonna lie. The control deck probably crashed out in top 32. If I'm wrong, then I'm wrong. But against like any more established strategy, then Mother control deck doesn't really have a chance. And when you let the matchups play out, you kind of get like a more standard top four, which is nice. So at the end of the day, I placed 155th out of 720 plus players, which is crazy, guys, because remember, the Digimon card game is dying, okay? And you should listen to when people tell you that the thing that you like sucks and the game is dying, okay? That is obviously a joke. Now, first of all, 720 players for a European event is crazy, and that's awesome. And hopefully, we'll just get bigger and better numbers. Who knows? Maybe we'll start getting like, 1,000-player European finals. Who knows when unification happens, right? But that's already insane that we got such a massive number for your European tournament. And despite me only placing 155th, I definitely think that I had the potential to at the very least place top 64 if I just dodged one red hybrid. And I think that's going to be like the thing that I'll have to take away from this is that like at the end of the day, 5 checks, no options is like, oh, sometimes you just die. But one different red hybrid matchup, and who knows what would have happened. But I'm still really happy with my play. My coaching definitely paid off. I was a lot more confident in my lines of play. Like none of my games really went into overtime despite me playing a combo heavy deck. I just kind of knew what to do. People that were on a very similar list to mine, like 1 card difference, were like undefeated in Swiss. Again, shoutouts to Yuxo. He was like first place in Swiss, I believe, on Levia, and then got knocked out in top 32. But maybe he will do a deck profile. He better also give me a shout out because I put him on the deck. And what did we learn from the event? We should maybe ban BT11 Mirage. I don't know. Card's pretty good, guys. But yeah, thanks for watching. And who knows, maybe I'll upload another time this year. But don't count on it.